when the Academy Awards came out that year, I was very hopeful for a nomination, and I found myself surprisingly devastated when it didn't happen. And
be honest with yourself for a moment. The first time Tim Curry filled a movie screen in front of us, in fishnets and pearls as Dr. Frank-N-Furter in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, none of us knew what to make of him. We laughed a little nervously. We looked around the theater, and then we leaned in closer, and we never really stopped leaning in for the next 50 years. This week, that 50-year conversation came to an end. Tim Curry passed away peacefully at his home in Los Angeles. He was 80 years old. And before this story is over, you will hear the 9 simple words Susan Sarandon chose for her goodbye. 9 words that say more about the real Tim Curry than half a century of headlines ever could. The news came quietly, which is exactly how he would have wanted it. On the night of August 25th, at his home in the Toluca Lake neighborhood of Los Angeles, Tim Curry slipped away. His longtime manager and dear friend Marcia Hurwitz confirmed the news the next morning. There was no long public countdown and no tabloid circus, just a short statement saying he passed peacefully at home, and a world that suddenly felt a little less colorful. And here is the detail that stopped so many of us cold. Tim Curry died on the very same day as Dolly Parton. 2 beloved icons, both 80 years old, both born in the opening months of 1946, gone within hours of each other. 2 artists from completely different worlds, taking their bows on the same night. If this week felt heavier than most, you were not imagining it. To understand what we lost, you have to go back to a small theater in London in 1973. A young English stage actor, already a veteran of the original London production of the musical Hair, stepped into a strange little rock and roll show at the Royal Court Theatre. The show was called The Rocky Horror Show, and the role was a mad scientist named Dr. Frank-N-Furter. Nobody involved thought they were making history. They were just trying to make the rent. 2 years later, in 1975, that stage show became a movie, directed by Jim Sharman and produced by Lou Adler for 20th Century Fox. The Rocky Horror Picture Show paired Curry with 2 fresh-faced American newcomers, a young Susan Sarandon and a young Barry Bostwick, playing the innocent couple who knock on the wrong castle door on a rainy night. The critics shrugged. The box office barely noticed. By every normal measure, the film failed. But something strange happened at the midnight screenings. Audiences came back. Then they came back again, in costume, shouting the lines, throwing rice at the screen, dancing in the aisles. Week after week, year after year, decade after decade, that so-called failure became the longest-running theatrical release in movie history, and it celebrated its 50th anniversary just last year. And at the center of it all, in fishnets and pearls, stood Tim Curry, fearless, magnetic, and completely unforgettable. Susan Sarandon was 29 years old when she stood on that soundstage with him. She went on to win an Academy Award and become one of the most respected actresses of her generation. She worked with nearly every great leading man of the last 50 years. And this week, when the news broke, she sat down and wrote a farewell to the one who came first. She posted a series of photographs of the 2 of them together across the decades, ending with him in full costume as the character that made him a legend. She called him funny. She called him an original.
What I loved about him most was his heart.
Not the voice, not the talent, not the legend, the heart. She went on to describe how, even after everything his body put him through in his final years, he stayed sweet and generous with every fan who approached him, and she thanked him for meaning so much to so many people before signing off with love. But to understand why that one small word, heart, meant everything, you have to go back to the beginning, back to a 12-year-old boy in England whose whole world had just collapsed. Tim Curry was born on April 19, 1946, in the village of Grappenhall in Cheshire, England. His father was a chaplain in the Royal Navy, and the family moved constantly, from posting to posting, the way military families do. Then, when Tim was still a boy, his father suffered a devastating stroke at just 45 years old. He lingered in a hospital for weeks, and then pneumonia took him. Tim Curry was 12 years old. Remember that detail. because more than 5 decades later, it would come back for him in a way that no screenwriter would dare invent. The fatherless boy found his voice, quite literally, in music. He sang in cathedral choirs as a child, studied drama at the University of Birmingham, and in 1968 landed his very first professional job in the London company of Hair. From the very start, he refused to be ordinary, and after Rocky Horror made him a cult icon, he spent the rest of his career proving he was never just one character. Think about the range for a moment, because it is almost absurd. In 1982, he played the scheming conman Rooster Hannigan in the movie musical Annie, singing and dancing his way through Easy Street alongside the great Carol Burnett. In 1985, he anchored the beloved comedy Clue as Wadsworth the butler, sprinting through that mansion at full speed and delivering some of the fastest, funniest dialogue ever put on film. That same year, he was the demonic Lord of Darkness in Ridley Scott's Legend, buried under pounds of makeup and still stealing every scene. He squared off with Sean Connery in The Hunt for Red October. He tormented a lost Macaulay Culkin as the smug hotel concierge in Home Alone 2. He sang his way through Muppet Treasure Island as Long John Silver and later swore the Muppets were among his favorite co-stars he ever worked with. And in 1990, he gave an entire generation nightmares as Pennywise the Clown in the original television adaptation of Stephen King's It, a portrayal so definitive that even Bill Skarsgård, who stepped into those shoes for the 2017 film remake, acknowledged the impossible shadow he was working in. Even Stephen King himself paid tribute this week, joining the flood of voices honoring him. Broadway never let go of him either. 3 Tony Award nominations tell that story. The first came in 1981 for playing Mozart himself in Amadeus, the second in 1993 for My Favorite Year, the third in 2005 when he ruled the stage as King Arthur in Monty Python's Spamalot and had audiences crying with laughter 8 shows a week. And throughout all of it, he never stopped lending that voice, that singular, irreplaceable voice, to animation. In 1992, he was Hexus, the oily villain of Ferngully, The Last Rainforest. He won a Daytime Emmy Award for his work as Captain Hook in Peter Pan and the Pirates, and later took home a Grammy Award for audiobook narration. And a generation of children came to know him as the magnificently pompous Sir Nigel Thornberry in The Wild Thornberrys, a role he voiced from 1998 through 2004. From horror icons to cartoon animals, he moved between worlds like the borders simply did not apply to him. Comedy, horror, drama, music, villains you loved and heroes you doubted. Over 5 decades, he moved between them all like the borders simply did not apply to him. The people who ran his career said this week that few actors have ever left so many distinct fingerprints on popular culture. They were not exaggerating. And then, in the summer of 2012, everything stopped. It happened during something completely ordinary, a massage. Tim Curry felt fine, or thought he did. But the massage therapist noticed something was wrong, something Tim himself could not feel, and made the call that saved his life. At the hospital, doctors rushed him into emergency brain surgery and removed 2 blood clots. Tim Curry, the man with one of the most celebrated voices in entertainment, woke up unable to speak. The stroke had paralyzed the entire left side of his body. He was 67 years old. Now think back to that 12-year-old boy in England, standing at his father's hospital bed. His father had a stroke. Weeks later, his father was gone. And now the son lay in a hospital bed of his own, having survived the very thing that took his father from him. In his memoir, Curry wrote about lying there and doing the arithmetic, realizing he was now 22 years older than his father had been at the end. The grim symmetry of our diagnosis was startling. Most men would have retreated. Most men would have closed the curtains. What Tim Curry did instead is the part of this story that nobody talks about enough. He could not walk. Speaking took months of grueling work to recover. The stage, his first and truest home, was closed to him forever. So he found the one door that was still open, his voice. From a wheelchair, he kept working, lending that unmistakable sound to animated films and television for years. He appeared at fan conventions across the country, signing photographs, meeting generation after generation of fans, from the original midnight movie crowd to their grandchildren. The people who met him in those years all tell the same story. He was warm, he was funny, he was present. He never rushed anyone, and he never phoned it in. Susan Sarandon saw it too, and it is exactly what she meant in that farewell. The body had been broken for more than a decade. The heart never was. In 2025, just last year, he finally told his own story in a memoir called Vagabond. He wrote honestly about the wild years, about the drinking that once worried his friends, about a director who once sat him down in a hotel room and pointedly listed all the famous alcoholics he had known. He wrote about getting sober. He wrote about the strange distance between the outrageous characters the world adored and the private, thoughtful man who played them, a man who guarded his real self so carefully that some fans were disappointed to learn he was nothing like his roles. And when a television interviewer asked him last year about death, this man who had already stared it down once gave an answer of astonishing peace. He said he tried to avoid it like anyone else, then added 10 words that land very differently this week. I suspect that in the end, I will welcome it. On August 25th, at home, peacefully, the end he had made his peace with finally came. And then the tributes began. Not the polite, obligatory kind, the kind that stop you in your tracks. Richard O'Brien, the man who created Rocky Horror and stood beside him on that stage in 1973, remembered him as a wonderful performer who never sought attention and never put himself above the roles he played. A good egg and class act. Patricia Quinn, who played Magenta, said she was utterly saddened and heartbroken. Nell Campbell, who played Columbia, said she would miss him tremendously. Michael McKean, who raced through that mansion with him in Clue, wrote a single sentence that says it all. Our blessing was that we had Tim Curry in our lives. Carol Burnett, his partner in crime from Annie, shared a clip of the two of them performing Easy Street together and remembered what a wonderful time they had making that film. Kiefer Sutherland, who rode alongside him in The Three Musketeers, called him someone he cared deeply about and said he felt lucky to carry those memories. Even the official Muppets paid their respects to their beloved Long John Silver. When the Muppets, Stephen King, and an Academy Award winner are all grieving the same man in the same week, you begin to understand the size of the life that just ended. But the farewell that hit the hardest came from Barry Bostwick. The young man who once knocked on that castle door is 81 years old now, the last surviving member of that central trio's innocent half, and he reached for the only words big enough. He quoted the finale of their movie back to his friend, the song about a river that was deep and a road that was long, about swimming it and running it anyway. And then he ended with 5 words that sound less like a eulogy and more like a phone call between two old friends. Damn it, Tim, I love you. 51 years ago, a failed midnight movie introduced us to a fearless young actor the world did not know what to do with. This week, that same world stopped to grieve him, from Broadway to Hollywood to every small-town theater that ever ran a midnight screening. The shy boy from Cheshire who lost his father at 12, who lost his voice at 67 and clawed it back, who spent his final decade in a wheelchair greeting fans with a smile, leaves behind no scandal and no bitterness. He leaves behind joy, strange, loud, generous, unrepeatable joy. Susan Sarandon was right. It was never really about the costumes or the characters or even that magnificent voice. What we all loved about him most was his heart. Rest easy, Tim. The river was deep, but you swam it. If Tim Curry ever made you laugh, or gave you a good scare, or got you singing along at midnight, share your favorite memory of him in the comments below. This community reads every single one, and stories like his deserve to be remembered together. If this tribute meant something to you, subscribing helps us honor more of the legends we grew up with, while they can still be celebrated the way they deserve. Thank you for spending this time remembering Tim Curry with us. Take care of each other, and we will see you in the next one.